We're going to start in 5 minutes. We will give you the press release in about a minute. As soon as you receive it, it's free of the embargo, so you can use it, if that's okay. So we'll give you a paper copy of the press release shortly, and we will email it to you, and you can use it immediately, even before the press conference starts.
Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, check. Working? Cool.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Craig Spence, the IPC Director of Media and Communications. Welcome to Bonn, and thank you for attending today's press conference relating to the IPC's suspension of the Russian Paralympic Committee and whether or not the Russian Paralympic Committee will be allowed to enter its athletes into the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Winter Games. Joining me on the top table this morning is the IPC President Andrew Parsons. Next to Andrew is Chelsea Gotel, who is the chairperson of the IPC Athletes Council. And at the far right is Peter van der Vliet, who is the IPC's Medical and Scientific Director. Before I hand over to Andrew, what I'd like to do is just basically give you the background on where we're here in the first place. As you know, the IPC Governing Board unanimously decided to suspend the Russian Paralympic Committee on the 7th of August 2016 due to its inability to fulfill its IPC membership obligations, in particular its obligation to comply with the IPC Anti-Doping Code and the World Anti-Doping Code, to which it is a signatory. As a result of the suspension, the Russian Paralympic Committee could not enter its athletes into the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games or the sports governed by the IPC. That's 10 sports that the IPC acts as the international federation for. In November 2016, the IPC appointed a 5-person task force led by former UK anti-doping chief executive and current British rowing chief executive Andy Parkinson. The task force is responsible for monitoring the Russian Paralympic Committee's progress in meeting the reinstatement criteria, which were published in December 2016. The task force, up until Saturday, had provided 4 updates to the board, most recently in December and then at the weekend, recommending each time that the suspension remain in place. In September 2017, the IPC Governing Board put in place a limited interim measure for Russian athletes to compete as neutrals in qualification events in 4 sports for the Pyeongchang Paralympic Winter Games, subject to them meeting published conditions. This limited interim measure was intended to preserve the ability of the RPC to enter its athletes into the Games should it have its suspension lifted. I will now hand over to Andrew Parsons, the President of the IPC, to update you on the decision taken on Saturday.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here in the IPC's home city of Bonn. On Saturday, the IPC Governing Board was updated by Andy Parkinson, Chair of the IPC Taskforce, on the progress of the Russian Paralympic Committee, RPC, in meeting its reinstatement criteria. As with previous updates, the IPC Taskforce and IPC Governing Board continue to be impressed by the RPC's level of cooperation and commitment in doing what it can to have its IPC membership suspension lifted. Since the reinstatement criteria were published in December 2016, the RPC has taken some highly significant steps to improve its governance, procedures, and practices. Such measures have given the IPC greater confidence that the anti-doping system and practices now in place in Russia are in much better order than what they were when we suspended the RPC in August 2016. Steps taken by the RPC include implementing a robust testing program of Russian para-athletes under the close supervision of WADA, launch of a new anti-doping education program targeted at para-athletes and coaches, introduction of a new whistleblower hotline whereby para-athletes, coaches, and officials can report any suspicions they have regarding anti-doping, and updating and finalizing its anti-doping rules. Despite this solid progress, the RPC has still not met 2 key reinstatement criteria. These are the full reinstatement of the Russian Anti-Doping Agency, RUSADA, by the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, the provision of an official response specifically and adequately addressing the findings made by Professor McLaren. Because the reinstatement criteria have not been met in full, the IPC Governing Board approved the IPC Task Force's recommendation to maintain the suspension of the RPC. Following this decision, the board then discussed whether to allow Russian para-athletes to compete as neutrals at the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Winter Games. With representatives from 5 continents and 6 para-athletes on a very diverse governing board, the debate was lengthy and the merits of every possibility were deliberated. At the core of all our thoughts was what impact any decision would have on para-athletes from both inside and outside of Russia. In reaching our decision, the board considered many factors, including those that led to the RPC's suspension. Back in the summer of 2016, the anti-doping system in Russia was found to be totally compromised, corrupted, and open to abuse. What was uncovered was not a minor breach of an obligation, a random failure, or the actions of one individual. This was an orchestrated attack on the integrity of sport, and an attack that threatened the very future of the sport as we know it. Such findings made it impossible for us to determine which Russian para-athletes were clean and which were not. It was clear that Russia's participation in para-sports events would severely question the integrity and credibility of sporting competition. In August 2016, we took measures that were necessary and proportioned to the situation we faced and that were essential to ensure clean sport. We took the correct decision for the Paralympic movement and para-athletes by suspending the Russian Paralympic Committee. Now, 17 months on, we face a different picture in Russia, and it is important that once again our decision is necessary and proportioned to what is in front of us. Although the RPC remains suspended, they have made significant progress, and we have to recognize this. Russian para-athletes are regularly tested and are amongst the most scrutinized para-athletes in the world. Under the supervision of WADA, we now have greater confidence that the anti-doping system in Russia is no longer compromised and corrupted. We have also witnessed behavioral and cultural changes by the RPC, which we hope will one day positively influence officials within the wider Russian Federation. Because of this progress, it is now the IPC Governing Board's view that allowing Russian para-athletes who meet strict criteria to compete at Pyeongchang 2018 as neutrals will not jeopardize our responsibility to ensure clean sport and a level playing field for all athletes. Therefore, the IPC will allow Russian para-athletes who meet strict conditions to participate in March's Paralympic Winter Games under the name Neutral Paralympic Athletes in the sports of alpine skiing, biathlon, cross-country skiing, snowboard, and wheelchair curling. Under the sport rules for para-ice hockey, an NPA team could not be considered as Russia had missed the opportunity to qualify. The delegation named Neutral Paralympic Athletes is a slight modification of a name the IPC has been using for this group of para-athletes since September, as part of an interim measure we introduced to allow Russian athletes to compete as neutrals in qualification events in snow sports. Para-athletes will compete under the Paralympic flag and in a uniform that has no national identification that relates to Russia. The Paralympic anthem will be played in any ceremony. Later today, the exceptional eligibility measures that para-athletes and officials must meet in order to be part of the NPA delegation will be published on Paralympic.org, the IPC's website. Key points are that para-athletes must meet precise testing requirements, be part of a registered testing pool, and have successfully completed anti-doping education. Importantly, any para-athlete or official implicated in any way, knowingly or unknowingly, by the numerous anti-doping investigations in Russia is prohibited from taking part in the Games. Only licensed para-athletes who meet the criteria in full and have qualified for the Games will be allowed to compete. Under the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Winter Games qualification guide, only unused slots, some of which have been returned by national Paralympic committees, will be distributed to eligible neutral Paralympic athletes. Looking at the current world rankings and the number of athletes currently participating under the limited interim measure, we estimate that there will be between 30 and 35 neutral Paralympic athletes competing in Pyeongchang. Following Pyeongchang 2018, the IPC Governing Board will meet once again to determine what this decision means for Russian para-athletes competing in summer sports that are governed by the IPC. We hope this decision will be fully respected not just by the RPC, but by the Paralympic movement as a whole. We also hope that this decision will further encourage the RPC to work with its institutional partners, in particular those within the Russian authorities, to meet the reinstatement criteria in full, so that the next time a major sporting event takes place within the Paralympic movement, the RPC can enter its athletes under the Russian flag. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to put in perspective the delegation size, in Sochi, the Russian team had 69 athletes. So we're estimating between 30 and 35 in Pyeongchang. Chelsea.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As a three-time Paralympian, I took immense pride in representing my country on the international stage. Competing at the Paralympic Games was the pinnacle of my swimming career, and to stand on top of the podium to hear my national anthem is something that I, together with my family and my friends, will never forget and cherish for the rest of my life. Since the IPC suspended the Russian Paralympic Committee in August of 2016, I have regularly heard both sides of the argument for and against Russia's participation in IPC-sanctioned competitions in my position as chair of the IPC Athletes Council. 17 months ago, Russian para-athletes who had trained for years to compete at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games could not participate on the biggest stage of all as a result of the RPC's suspension. It was a decision that was hard to take for all Russian para-athletes, and my fellow Athlete Council member, Mikhail Tretniev, has shared with us many of the views from the athletes from his home country. Ultimately, however, the IPC's decision of August 2016 was the correct one. It was necessary and proportionate to the situation it faced at the time, and was a decision that was supported by the majority of athletes from around the world. The reason why it was supported by so many is that as an athlete, when you line up on the start line, you want to do so confident that everyone is there on an even playing field. The McLaren report, published 54 days before the Rio 2016 opening ceremony, revealed the anti-doping system in Russia to be completely broken, and that both summer and winter athletes had benefited from practices that have absolutely no place in sport. Had Russians taken part in Rio 2016 or subsequent IPC sanctioned competitions, there would have been no trust, no certainty as to whether these athletes were clean or not, and no confidence that there was a level playing field for all competing para-athletes. I think all para-athletes within the Paralympic movement will always feel an element of sympathy for the Russian athletes that could not compete at Rio 2016. They knowingly or unknowingly were part of a complex and highly calculated system that was designed to cheat their opponents. And this is why this sympathy is mixed with anger and regret. Anger that para-athletes have missed out on international medals, including Paralympic medals at the Sochi 2014 Games, and regret that para-athletes have been denied the opportunity to stand atop the podium to hear their national anthem and prevented from reaping the benefits of winning a gold medal. The IPC Governing Board decision to allow Russian athletes who meet strict conditions to compete as neutrals at the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Winter Games was not taken lightly. But it was a decision that was taken with the interest of all para-athletes at its heart. As a member of the IPC Athlete Council and the athlete representative to the IPC Governing Board, the athlete viewpoint is always front of mind. A core view shared by each of our council members is that it is vital that the international governing body thinks about all athletes and does its utmost to protect clean sport. I think this latest decision ensures this. For Russia para-athletes, though as neutrals, the decision gives them the opportunity to fulfill their Paralympic dream. I am sure they would prefer to compete under their country's flag like every other para-athlete, but Russia's unwillingness to take responsibility for the biggest doping scandal ever to take place in sport should not be rewarded nor celebrated. For the athletes of the other competing countries, they can compete in confidence that their rivals are regularly tested by RUSADA and others under the supervision of WADA and the International Paralympic Committee. To compete in Pyeongchang, Russian athletes will have to also meet strict conditions. A level playing field is all any athlete wants, and I truly believe we'll have this in Pyeongchang when the Paralympic Winter Games open on March 9th. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. We will now open the floor to questions. Standard procedure, if you've got a question, raise your arm, state your name and publication, and wait for the microphone to come to you, and then we'll take it from there. So we'll start. Whoa. We will start with Liam from Inside the Games.
To Andrew, Liam from Inside the Games. Chelsea just said there that Russia should not be rewarded for an unprecedented attack on sport, yet there will still be Russian athletes in Pyeongchang at the Paralympics competing. So you're saying that they shouldn't be rewarded, but 30 to 35 might still compete, which is around half of who competed in Sochi. So are we expecting this decision to be criticised at all? And what would you say to those who might say that Russia should have been banned completely? Thank you.
Well, we took a decision that was ahead of Rio 2016 that was necessary and proportioned at that time. Now, 17 months later, we face a different situation where, differently from the Rio period, when we couldn't guarantee which athletes were clean and which athletes were not. Now, 17 months later, under the supervision of WADA and under the supervision of the IPC, this is something that we can guarantee. We can say, we can have a very good understanding of which athletes are clean, which athletes are not. So it's a completely different situation now from our point of view. And again, we are taking a decision that is necessary and proportioned. We don't think that we are weakening our position in any way. People might have opinions about that around the world, but we often said during our deliberations last Saturday, can we look in the eyes of the athletes, all of them, and say that we are doing everything that we can to guarantee a level playing field? And the answer was yes. So we are not rewarding Russia, but we are allowing athletes that we believe are clean to compete under a neutral flag.
Go for Peter at the back.
Hello, hi. Peter Oliver from RT International. If I could, to Mr. Parsons and also for a follow-up to Dr. Van der Vliet. We are still going to see a situation where athletes that have never tested positive for any banned substances will not be able to compete in these games. I would like to hear from you how you think how that will affect them, how that is fair. Also, the investigation that WADA is conducting into B-sample bottles that, when frozen, are easy to open. How that impacts the Russian investigation, how that impacts your thoughts, and to Dr. Van der Vliet, the medical implications of what seemingly is a problem with viability of B-samples, that these bottles could be opened when frozen.
If you don't mind, I will defer to Peter to answer the first questions and the questions that are more technical. And immediately after, I will give my opinion from, I would say, a presidential point of view. Peter, please.
Thank you and good morning to all. We got, as you did overnight, the message about the bottles and problems that arise there. We don't have an answer to that question. That's subject of investigation primarily by the laboratory, by WADA and by Berlinger, the company who produces these bottles. However, these bottles were not in use in 2014. These bottles are bottles that is a new generation of bottles that were, to my understanding, only introduced September 2017.
Sorry, before a question of what it meant to the viability of a drugs testing system, and if you have issues like this.
The fact that an alert system kicked in and that a laboratory reported gives us the confidence that these checks and balances are in place. They do not compromise the anti-doping system as such. Obviously, it keeps us on alert that we need to consider improvements wherever they can be made. But for me, as being responsible operationally for the implementation of an anti-doping program, it's very good to see that immediately upon something happening, reporting has been put in place and follow-up has been initiated. Thank you.
I couldn't have answered those technical questions, sorry, with such great detail. The athletes were implicated in the system, so only the athletes that we can prove and therefore they meet strictly the criteria that was set up are the ones that we were allowed to compete. So it's not a matter of if I think it's fair or not, it's a matter of meeting a criteria that was approved by the IPC Governing Board.
The board's duty is to ensure a level playing field for athletes in Pyeongchang. Now, if an athlete has been implicated in a report, then therefore there's question marks over that. So therefore they don't meet the eligibility criteria, and therefore they can't compete in Pyeongchang. And that also extends to officials who have been implicated in anti-doping investigations as well.
Lisa Gerson, MTV Broadcasting Company, Russia. The decision was meant to be announced a month ago, but you took this extra month to think. So you leave less time for Russia to react and to appeal. And also, why did it happen? Why did you need this month for? And also, why did you refuse the right for Mr. Vladimir Lukin to talk at your session, so the head of Russian Paralympic Committee?
I will try to answer one by one. The first is because why we took the decision now and we didn't take the decision a month ago. We took the decision now because we follow the recommendation from our independent task force, and they are 100% independent. And their recommendation at the time was to keep the suspension and extend the limited interim measure until this governing board meeting. And we approved the recommendation during a conference call. Now, once again, we are following and approving the suggestions or the directions pointed out by the independent task force. So they came, recommendations is the word I was looking for, I'm sorry. They came with a set of recommendations again, and once again we are approving them. So we are not delaying any decision, we are just approving the recommendations that the independent task force, who is independent, have put in front of us. We didn't allow the president of the NPC of Russia to come and give more and talk to the governing board, because our relationship with the Russian Paralympic Committee, it's been since the beginning of this process through the independent task force that was agreed with the Russian Paralympic Committee. So we didn't think that they will provide more detail, more information after the recommendations coming from the independent task force. And again, because this was a relationship that was agreed between the three parties. So we just follow what was agreed a number of months ago. I can't recall from the top of my head, but when we started this process of the independent task force.
Can I just respond to that? In September, when we announced the limited interim measure in Abu Dhabi, just before our General Assembly, we said the board would meet again following the WADA Foundation board meeting. Now, December's governing board call, where we again said the decision would be taken in January. In December, we weren't planning to make a decision on Pyeongchang. We were making a decision regarding what the WADA Foundation board had decided. Now, the WADA Foundation Board decided that RUSADA should not be reinstated. We then said we would meet again in January. Why? Because we wanted to keep the door open to the Russian Paralympic Committee for as long as possible to meet the reinstatement criteria. We didn't want to slam the door shut in December and find out that in January they'd met the reinstatement criteria. So it was a straightforward decision. We waited for the WADA Foundation Board meeting, we met and discussed that, and in January we said all along, 22nd of January or later this month is the final cut-off, and the reinstatement criteria has not been met, and therefore the RPC remains suspended.
Just as a matter of clarification, this governing board meeting was scheduled a long time ago. It was not something that was scheduled after the call we had on 19th of December. So we took this opportunity to meet and receive once again a recommendation from the Taskforce. What will have been the decision in 19th December, I cannot speculate, but if the final decision was to be taken by that day, it will probably not be very different from the decision we are announcing today, but we gave them more time to improve some of the conditions and to meet some of the criteria.
Artem from TAS, we'll go a question here. Ros?
Mr. Parsons, I would like to ask about two criteria, McLaren report and the restatement of RUSADA. As you know, the Russian Paralympic Committee cannot affect on these two criteria because it's not his deal. So what do you think about the situation? It could be stuck on it for many, many times.
We hope that we will not get stuck in that situation forever. But that will mean that somebody else, other than the Russian National Paralympic Committee and the IPC, will have to take action.
Question at the back there. Russia 1.
Channel 1 Russia, Ivan Blagoy. I have a question to Mr. Parsons. So you've just mentioned it was impossible before the Rio Games. It was impossible to determine which Russian para-athletes were clean and which were not. But only 1,350, as I remember, doping probes were taken during the Games with more than 4,000 of participants. So there are more than 1,000 of athletes which were not tested at all. How can you explain this logic? So you cannot guarantee that these athletes who were allowed to compete were also clean. Thank you for the answer.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Can you repeat the question, or can someone clarify for me? So there were so many numbers in it.
Okay. So only 1,350 doping probes were taken during the Games in Rio. I mean the Paralympic Games. The number of participants is more than 4,000. That means that there are thousands of athletes who were not tested at all. And could you explain the logic? If if the Paralympic Committee suspended the Russian athletes because there is no guarantee that they are clean, you have allowed to compete thousands of athletes with no guarantee that they are clean. Thanks.
Okay, now I understand, and it's about Rio, not about Pyeongchang. I would just like to reinforce that we are here to speak about the decision that was taken to Pyeongchang, about the Pyeongchang Winter Games. But of course, I will answer your question. It's not about the number of athletes being tested. It's about the system that was put in place in a specific country that didn't give us the assurance that the athletes coming from that particular country or whether we will be able to determine if they were clean or not. And as I said in the beginning, the participation of Russia in that edition of the Paralympic Games of any athlete will probably put a strong question mark in the integrity of those games. Now, because of the improvements made by the Russian Paralympic Committee, when it comes to their anti-doping policy, we are taking a different approach.
Also, to add on to that, it's not a case of just looking at testing at the Games. The McLaren report revealed that the Russian anti-doping system had been broken since at least 2011 through to 2016. So for 5 years, we couldn't have trust that Russian athletes were clean or not. This isn't a question about testing at the Games. This is leading up to the Games. Could we ensure that Russian athletes were clean? And the answer categorically is no.
Now, we believe we're in a stronger position leading up to the Games, where Russian athletes are regularly tested by, under the supervision of WADA, and when they're attending IPC competitions by the IPC. And now we've got confidence that those tests mean what they tell us, and we didn't have that confidence before the Games.
And another one question, are other athletes from other countries are so systematically tested as Russians?
Peter, do you want to answer that one?
The answer is yes. And I would like to reiterate that the real value of an anti-doping program is not necessarily the numbers of athletes or the number of doping controls at the Games. It is the efforts that are made throughout the year and in the lead up to the Games. And that's why the numbers is a very complex situation to answer upon. At this very moment, our pre-Games testing program is full in place. That covers all the athletes that are in the long list, that are potential candidates to be finally selected for the Pyeongchang Games, and having the limited interim measures in place in September allowed the IPC to enter and allowed Russian Paralympic Committee to enter athletes in certain competitions, which also allowed the IPC to have these athletes in our radar, to consider any testing that needed to be done and take them on board with the same scrutiny and the same values as we do with any other athlete that are on a road to Pyeongchang.
On the front row here.
Yes, Kosuke Nagaki from the Asahi Shimbun. Question to President Parsons. So Saturday's council was a very long discussion. So did you take a vote for determining that allowing the neutral athletes to compete? If so, was there a unanimous decision or not? Thank you.
We took two decisions at the meeting. It was unanimous when it comes to maintaining the suspension of the Russian Paralympic Committee, and it was a large majority to allow a neutral Paralympic athletes team to compete at the Games. Questions all coming from the left-hand side of the room today. Question at the back.
Anton of Russia One Channel. The IOC allowed some of our Russian sportsmen to participate in the Games as Olympic athletes from Russia, not neutral. Olympic athletes from Russia. Why could not you do the same? Thank you.
Well, first of all, we are two separate organizations. We have different structures, and that's why sometimes we have different decisions. We introduced a limited interim measure in September, having a very similar name, neutral para-athletes by them. So what we're doing now is just slightly changing the name for neutral Paralympic athletes. So that's why we took the decision on the name, and that's why sometimes we will make decisions that are a bit different or that are significantly different from the IOC ones. Just to add on to that, the Russian Paralympic Committee remains suspended. Under our rules, we can't then use part of that name in a team title, so therefore we cannot use the name Russia in the title of the team, so there's two reasons. Any more questions? Come on, right side of the room, you must want one. Just front row. Roz? Yes, one.
Hello, Masashino from Kyoto News. This question a little bit apart from the Russian things, but I'm just wondering if you had any decision on participation of North Korean athlete to the Pyeongchang Paralympic Games. Thank you.
Yeah, the board discussed it at this weekend's meeting. We will be announcing who has received bipartite slots for the sport of Nordic skiing on the 2nd of February to the relevant NPCs. There will be an announcement later this week regarding the outcomes of those discussions with the governing board. It was discussed, and we'll tell you the outcomes later this week. But today is all about the Russian Paralympic Committee and the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Winter Games. We'll wrap it up there. There's one last question from Liam. First and last question, aren't you lucky?
To Andrew again, if I may. I'm just reading through some of the criteria that relating to Russia at Pyeongchang. How exactly will this no Russian flag emblem be policed at Pyeongchang? Because it's easy to say we won't do it, but then how do you stop people bringing in flags and other emblems? And can you clarify exactly what so is it the coat of arms, the emblem, the Paralympic Committee logo? What exactly can't they bring and what can't be visible at Pyeongchang venues? Thank you.
Well, later today we'll have in the IPC website the whole document with the criteria. But I think your question is more to spectators than okay. According to the ticketing policy, and this is something to the organizing committee, not only Russia, but you cannot bring any flag from a non-participating country. So Russia is a non-participating country. Does that answer your question? Okay. When it comes to logos and something, it's something that will be announced later today. You know, the colors, but. Again, if there is any medal ceremony, it will be the Paralympic anthem that will be played. At the opening ceremony, they will march, but then the Paralympic, under the neutral Paralympic athlete delegation, and under the IPC flag.
And in terms of uniform, these athletes have been competing in a neutral uniform since September, with pretty much the same rules. So this isn't something new to these athletes to face. It's something that's just an extension of what we've already had since September. Is that everyone for questions? We'll wrap it up there. We will do one-to-ones. I have a short list of organisations who would like to interview the President. If you want to interview the President as well and you've not already been to see me, then please come and add your name to the list. We can do the interviews either inside or outside. We also have Chelsea Gotel, our chairperson of the IPC Athletes Council, available for interview, and Peter van der Vliet, who's our medical and scientific director. If you'd like to interview Chelsea or Peter, please speak to my colleague Raphael, who's to the left-hand side, and speak to me if you wish to interview President Parsons. Thank you. We'll speak soon.